So in this video for Hatshepsut, we're trying to gain a bit of an understanding of the role of New Kingdom queens, and this will give us a benchmark for understanding how well Hatshepsut fulfilled these roles during her time as a queen when she was married to Thutmose II. So our main sort of source for this is Gay Robbins, who wrote Women in Ancient Egypt, and gives us a very clear insight and quite a lot of depth in an understanding of the role of royal women during this time period. Robbins suggests that women and royal women during this time period, their importance came from their direct association and their relationship to the king at the time. So whether they were the king's daughter or the king's mother or the king's sister or the king's great wife or principal wife, that's how they determined their relationship, and we see that often in the titles that they're afforded, which highlight those actual relationships. We also know of the Vulture Headdress, which we have spoken about before. This is an image of Hatshepsut with the Vulture Headdress on her sarcophagus, her queenly sarcophagus, and we think it might have been some kind of symbol of the divinity of queenship. We're not 100% sure, but it might have had some kind of divine symbolism here. And we also see Hatshepsut wearing this in the scenes where she's embarking upon ritual action, standing behind, or her husband is the king, embarking upon ritual action, and she's standing behind her king in those scenes. Another thing we need to understand about the role of queen is that there was the expectation generally that the successor to the king would come from the king's principal wife or his queen. We know that that didn't always happen. It did not happen with Thutmose II or Thutmose III, but we think that was the expectation during this time period if it was possible. We also know that the role that the king's mother and the king's principal wife had to play were quite important in ritual affairs, so in regards to religion. And we can see that here in this image of Hatshepsut wearing the traditional vulture headdress, standing behind her husband, the king Thutmose II, as he's performing ritual action in this scene here. So we see this in temples and in royal stelae, and the king is performing the action and the queen is standing there supporting the king as he performs that ritual action. King's mother also played an important role, particularly with Hatshepsut, who innovated the divine birth scenes. So Queen Ahmose, who is the king's mother, her mother when she becomes the king in this case, so we are fast forwarding to when Hatshepsut is king, has impregnated, Amun has come down and impregnated Ahmose, Hatshepsut's mother, who then becomes the king. And so therefore in this particular instance, and later on when that's repeated by later kings, that's the role of that queen is important when she becomes the king's mother. So she's the queen at the time because she's Queen Ahmose was married obviously to Thutmose I, and Amun comes down and impregnates Queen Ahmose, and she then gives birth to the new king, Hatshepsut. So particularly with Hatshepsut with the divine birth scenes, we see the king's mother playing a somewhat different role there and an important role. Another thing we need to understand is that there are other examples of important and influential queens prior to Hatshepsut who perhaps offered her some examples to follow. The first being Queen Hatshepsut. She had some particularly real power, and we think, perhaps we're not 100% sure, that she acted as a regent to her son Ahmose. And she was afforded that title, God's Wife of Amun, which is obviously a very important title during this time period and given to many of these early royal women, particularly the principal wives. We also have Ahmose Nefertari, who was Ahmose's principal wife, so a generation later. She was probably as important as Ahotep, and we know that Ahmose bestowed upon her that title of God's Wife of Amun as well, which we also know Hatshepsut had. So these early queens also had that same title, God's Wife of Amun. So again, moving on to that title, God's Wife of Amun, it's a hereditary title, and it was passed down all the way through to Hatshepsut. And in Thutmose III's reign, so after the death of Hatshepsut, it almost disappears. So we don't see women sort of being given this title after that, which has led to a lot of historians speculating as to why that might be. Did Hatshepsut come to power because she held this title and then it was seen as too powerful? We know that as a result of the title, God's Wife of Amun, that probably had some kind of priestly title or priestly essence or priestly role attached to it. So we think that maybe these royal women who held this title, God's Wife of Amun, did fulfill some kind of ritual priestly function. And we also know that those women who were afforded this title had land and staff to administer it as well. So they were given titles of land which were theirs to look after and to have looked after for them. So there's a bit of an overview of those important aspects of royal women during this time period.